we will have to go into the Edit 3D settings to adjust some things. And this is where I will go through the different settings. So you'll notice just by default, it's not oriented, everything's black, and there's no lighting. So we're going to go ahead and fix that by going to Edit 3D settings. So in the Sketchfab settings, there's a couple things we have to change. And I did a little bit of researching. First off, it's not oriented properly, right? We can easily do that by straightening the bottle here. And I think we can rotate along this X, right? So now it is upright, perfect. That sounds great. Now, next thing is that we notice that none of the textures look right. They're all black. What we can do, actually, it's a little bit weird. I'm not sure if it's a bug, but by default, Sketchfab will actually detect that there's vertex color on the model. And vertex color is like the equivalent to polypaint in ZBrush, where it's color information directly on the model, and it's not actually reading off of a separate .png or anything like that. So in this case, it's actually being confused between two different things, texture files and the vertex color. What we want to do is just turn that off. So now it's all white, which is fine. It just means that we just have to import our textures. And luckily, because it's a .fex, I'll show you, the texture files are actually within this model that we just need to apply it. I'm going to change the background color just so it's a little bit clearer to see. That's great. And then I'm going to go into materials, because first step is I want to get my textures in. So under base color, I'm going to open this tab, go to texture, I'm going to import texture. And because it's separately exported these other texture files, I can actually select all of these. I'm not going to be using all of them, but I'm just going to select all of them so they're there and open up. And it will load all of these, which is perfect. The only texture files that we really need, and to make it look right, is this .png here. Okay, and as well as there is an opacity that we might use. Yeah, that's about it actually. We could apply the other ones in respective channels, but for this kind of prototype, it's not as necessary. So you'll notice that when I applied it, it only applied it to the trunk, right? This is because there are actually several materials on this tree that we all have to apply the same thing to. So right now, I'm going to go to cap. I'm going to do the same thing. And because we already imported it, we actually can just choose the texture here. Right, so I'm actually just going through and applying the base color code. And you can see that slowly all the textures are coming alive. We did that. And we did that. And it's just all the same texture file because we chose Atlas, which just means that all the texture files are in the same .png. So all the base color texture files have been applied. You'll see that it's all colored, which is great. We don't have to go through these other settings. Actually, we'll get into these once we start the lighting because we might notice some discrepancies. But for the most part, this is looking good. Yeah. Okay, that's great. I'm gonna go back and change the background color so it's a little bit clearer. Okay, and everything else is good. Just as an FYI, you can just turn off emission. Emission is just kind of a glowy effect, but this tree doesn't emit any glow, so that's fine. We're going to lighting. Okay, so in lighting, Nicholas has mentioned that he wants some kind of directional lighting coming from a singular source from a certain angle. So what we're going to do is turn on our lights. And by default, 3 will be on. We can actually turn off 2 of them. So we only have the 1, and that one is right up there. And this is a directional light by default, which means that no matter where this is positioned, whatever direction it's pointing at, that's just where the light will come from. like only in that direction. So in Nicholas's case, let's say you wanted a 45, I can just set it to a 45-degree angle. And that's what it is. You'll notice that it's slightly colored. Now, I'm not sure how specific Nicholas wants this, but you can set it to white, which is more of like a studio lighting. But if he wants to emulate the sun, all I have to do is just put like a kind of orangey yellow kind of tint on it to emulate the sun's rays. Okay, good. Now it's casting the shadow, and we can actually change the intensity of the light. With this, you'll see how it changes. Now you'll notice that because of a color light, and as I increase the intensity, it starts coloring the actual model itself. We basically want to avoid that. And just try to set it to an amount that we can see. Now right here, you'll see ground shadows. We can just turn that on, and now you'll have ground shadows without the ground plane. And it'll just disappear when you look up at it, but that's fine. So that's great. Now you'll notice that the direction of the light does not match the casted shadow on the ground, and in general, everything is evenly lit. That's because we have some environment light on. We can actually turn that off, and now we're strictly only seeing the directional light, which is a little bit clearer to see. And I might need to adjust the color. A little bit too yellow. Now at the same time, when I turned off environment light, my cast shadow, my ground shadow disappeared. And this is where it gets a little bit weird, because what we're going to do is actually we're going to turn on the environment lighting, but set the brightness to just a little bit, so it's barely affecting it, right? So at the same time, we have a ground shadow, yet the only source of light that is actually coming towards is this one. You can set this up. And these black spots is basically where light doesn't actually hit at all, because of the angle. And if that is a little bit awkward, what we can do is actually set another light. So this is another directional light, and we're going to set it the opposite way. So directly the opposite, and this is in 3D space. There you go. So that's a little bit more evenly lit, and we're going to tone this down just a tiny bit. Change this to a white color. So instead of like so before it used to be like pitch black, but because we added a little tiny light in there, it's very soft light, we're still lighting a little bit, so it doesn't look too bad. So now what you can see is that we have the light coming in, and you can see where the light hits. It's not so black, and we have a ground shadow. Now, in terms of orienting the ground shadow, because our environment light is not actually affecting or influencing the model too much, we can actually just go ahead and orient this with the slider and just match it to wherever that directional light is hitting, like that. So it's like somewhat close. It doesn't have to be physically accurate. That looks right. So we can look at that looks right. Great. And within here, we can, within the 3D settings of Sketchfab, we can actually play around with the whole changing the light orientation control that anyone will be able to use. So to do that, it's holding Alt and dragging right click, and you'll see that everything rotates. So my directional lights, both of them, plus my ground shadow. So this is a great feature, because then everything will stay consistent, right? So that's perfect. That is looking great. There are some other settings here that you can change. So for example, when you're changing this kind of shadow down here under environment, what you'll be really changing is actually just the ground shadow. So let's say we want it to be a little bit different. We can change that there. Oh, sorry, actually, ground shadow, you can change the intensity of the shadow like this. And you can experiment with how natural it looks and what you want. And yeah, actually here, you'll see that there's like a little ground plane that we can control. We can actually control it and try to set it as close as possible, so it's not too far off, like that. And let's say the direction of the light should spread the shadow further, we can actually change, slide a little bit. And what we can do is grab a studio light and change the orientation. Yeah, there you go. So you can find the different, these are called HDRIs, that sets the shadow a little bit differently. Yeah, that's too far. Yeah, and you can just find whichever one that looks sort of correct to the angle of the light that's hitting it. And it doesn't have to be perfect. Yeah, I'm just going to set it to that as default. And again, you can just set this brightness down to really low, but not 0. So you still have the ground plane. But yeah, that's about it. I'm going to change this color. It's not too much. Yeah, so those are all pretty much the settings. And I'm going to zoom in here and change the orientation of the lights just to check. Yep, so all the shadows are looking correctly. Now I'm going to go through some advanced settings just in case Nicholas wants to take this up to like another level. Right now, when you go to the Materials tab, we only added the base color. However, we have all these other tabs and we have other textures that can be plugged into here. Basically, the important one that we might need to place would be the roughness. Which you can't really add a texture file. Oh, you can. So roughness and subsurface scattering. So roughness, as the name implies, is basically, it's a texture map that actually controls how rough a surface is. Yeah, so for example, the roughness of a flower petal is going to be different from the roughness of the trunk, which will actually affect very slightly and sort of subtle how the light interacts and shines on it. So to give you an example, I'm going to grab the tree bark. So this is the tree bark. And when I select it, you'll see that in yellow it's highlighted, so we know what we're going for. In roughness, I'm going to choose a texture. And sometimes it's named different things, but basically you want to look for glossiness. Okay, so gloss. And it will automatically set that. So that's how glossy it is. And then I'm going to go to, let's say, the Cherry Blossom 2. And I change that roughness to the same one, it's gloss. Yes, cool beans. And as well as, because they're flower petals, I'm going to turn on subsurface scattering. And there is under subsurface scattering texture, when I choose a texture, I am going to select this. So it's one of these, subsurface color or subsurface amount. I'm going to click subsurface amount here. Oh, sorry. The texture, for the texture part here in subsurface scattering, the first one, I think that should be subsurface color. Yeah. That is because they have different color profiles. And for translucency, we want to select subsurface amount. Good. Okay, so I don't have oh, actually, maybe I can have it before and after. So I'm going to zoom in here, and we have a little bit of the mattes applied. So I'm going to toggle this on and off, and you'll see a slight difference. Okay, so this is with subsurface on, and this is off. This is on, and this is off. Now from afar, it's not too different, right? It's very minor, but it's more like if you really wanted to look at the details, you can have this on. It makes it look a little bit nicer. And this is what it originally looks in the SpeedTree Modeler program. And you can do the same thing and go ahead and plug in all these other maps, but every map that you do put in, it's just like a kind of like a subtle detail. So also zooming in here, So I attached a roughness map to the bark and a roughness map to the flowers. And when I rotate the light, you'll see that subtly it reacts to light a little bit differently. So this bark has a little bit of a glossy finish to it, so it's a little bit shinier. Whereas these petals, which are a little bit low poly, react to as something more like a clay kind of looking thing. So before I mentioned something about an opacity map, if I turn this on and plug this in, the texture of it might actually, or the look of it will actually change. Say opacity. Okay, I didn't really do anything. But
would it be preferable for me to put in all the maps, or does that just dramatically increase the file size for no reason?
Actually, it won't increase the file size at all because this is all within Sketchfab. So yeah, you can go ahead and do that if you want.
Okay.
Yeah, it will look a tiny bit better. But yeah, if you have time, totally go for it. I only went through the more important maps if it's like a time sensitive thing. But yeah, you can always attach it. And if you come across a situation where you just plugged in a map and it actually looks worse in your opinion, then you can just leave that one out.
Okay.
Yeah. So that's about it. Yeah. Yeah. And last setting is that once you're done setting all this up, we can set an angle or whatever. We can save the view. So by default, it will open up like this. And then you can go ahead and publish if you want. I'm going to go ahead and publish this one because we're going to give an update to Nicholas, but that's pretty much all of it. Yeah. Cool. I'm going to stop. Oh, let's stop recording.